Welcome to Share Truth Apply Scripture, the radio program of Engage Magazine. I'm Jordan Shambly, joined by Wesley Wildman, and Dr. Robert Youngblood is with us today. We're going to continue our series that we started last week on 5 things that churches rarely talk about.
Yeah, in a public setting, because as we mentioned, it can be uncomfortable, some of these topics. Also, not only uncomfortable, some of them can be very tense in the difference of opinions on certain things like we're going to talk about. So we're really excited, though, because as we jump into this next issue, like we mentioned before, we're going to have people come in that either have a little bit more personal experience on it or an actual expert on it. And so we just hope that through this series of the 5 things that are less likely talked about in a public setting, we just hope that there will be discussion among you, and that it will edify you, encourage you, and show you that the Bible does have some answers and the answer to some of these issues that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, that's definitely the goal. And Doctor, I'm sorry, you told me to call you Robert.
Please, just call me Robert.
Yeah, there we go. Robert,
tell them a little bit. Tell them a little bit about yourself, Doctor.
Yeah.
Well, I am a doctor of chiropractic, but in my personal story, I've tried to commit suicide twice, and I said that wrong. Okay, we'll get into more of that later. But
Sure.
Suicide's been on my heart twice, where I had a loaded gun and was ready to go. It was a horrible thing. I don't wish anything. I've lost friends to suicide. And I've counseled people who've lost relatives, and I've counseled people to not. So my story is I'm a human being like anybody else.
Right. Yeah. That's true. And I mean, that's honestly, we thought it would be really valuable to have somebody, because I personally have not had any experience or have been close to someone who has gone through that, and I'm
I have not myself, but I don't know anybody closely, but I've been on the phone with someone that's actually called, or somehow or another I've got in contact with someone that was had those thoughts and was right there. And from AFA gets those calls probably a couple times a year, and Brother Bert, who many of y'all listen to on Exploring the Word, he'll take that phone call and be able to help. So I'm vaguely, I'm familiar with it to some degree. But Dr. Youngblood is going to help us today as we discuss a topic of suicide, as we introduced. And Dr. Youngblood also, or Robert also, helps out on staff here with AF4. You considered full-time, part-time?
I'm considered full-time.
Full-time.
My official title is Assistant Digital Media Editor.
There you go.
With the stand.
And you have to say that twice real fast.
Oh, please
don't.
Okay.
No, but what he does is and we're very grateful for Robert's contribution and commitment to the work of AFA, as he edits half or more of the articles that go up on the stand that you can find on afa.net. Also, I'm sure once you start editing here, you probably edit other things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I get the pleasure of working with all sorts of written media.
Yes. And he does an excellent job, and you can find his work. He's written a lot of articles that you can find at afa.net. We'll include his his work, because I'm sure you can click on his name and then you can find different.
Definitely.
I'll provide a link. That'll make it easy.
There we go.
We'll link to that in the
great writer,
notes.
great editor, and we're thankful for him. And he is going to help us today as we talk about the topic of suicide. So you want to get us started with the topic?
Yeah. So like in the previous show, we talked about anxiety and depression, and how often those things, anxiety and depression and suicide, go hand in hand. Too often, honestly. And what we talked about in the previous episode was how to deal with it, whether we're going through it ourselves or someone else we know is going through it, how to deal with it in a biblical way that honors God, but also really does help the individual. That's our goal.
It's empathetic and sympathetic. I mean,
Right, yeah. So what we're going to talk about in this first segment is maybe what are the thought processes, the paths that lead someone to thinking that suicide is the answer, and some of the outside forces that kind of prompt someone to go towards that. I know we've talked about here at AFA, we've talked about the Netflix series 13 Reasons Why a lot. and which was it had a weird effect on society, but mostly negative, to the point where it was inspiring people to take that step and to end their lives.
Yeah.
And at the very least, we can say it opened up a discussion that we can take advantage of and bring
Absolutely.
the gospel to.
So the Bible's pretty clear about guarding our hearts, and our hearts. I had a organic chemistry professor years ago. He said, watch your kidneys, because in the Old Testament, the kidneys kind of referred to the brain and our processing of all the information to filter things. And so when we look at suicide, the human nature tends to, with most problems, looks for one cause. Suicide is a complex issue. I've heard people talk about stress, anxiety. We were talking about that. What happens is you can have stress and anxiety. Imagine, if you would, say a 55-gallon drum that's open at the top and it's filled with water. Well, you add these things, and then suddenly one little thing happens, like someone cuts you off in front of the road. Now you got road rage. It wasn't that one incident. It was all those things that accumulated or came together. Now, there is a certain thing, speaking of 13 Reasons Why, something called copycat suicide, where if all these reasons are there, then this actual event where something is emulated and they're given lots of attention and things like that, as the show indicates, then the person is more likely to be influenced by that. And so suicide really is a public health issue. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting, at one time, Stephen King pulled a book called Rage. And the book, he was concerned about how the book influenced and dealt with school shootings. And using the same logic, because Reed Hastings said at one time, and I hope I have this nearby, but I believe he said, they don't have to watch it. Well, by the same token, using that same logic, if Stephen King's issue was shootings, they didn't have to use a gun. But Stephen King's had enough wherewithal to know, okay, I hold some responsibility in this. And even Netflix in itself, with the recent, what was that, Blind Box or Blind?
Bird Box.
Bird Box, thank you. They realized that they even put a warning, please don't attempt these things blindfolded. So on one hand, they're saying, oh, we don't influence people. But on the other, they're saying, oh, we do influence people, and we hold some responsibility.
Exactly. And so, what you for those that are listening, either you or somebody that this process, what you're saying is that this accumulates over time. Somebody doesn't just wake up and go, I want to take my own life. Is that what you're saying?
Well,
in your experience,
in from what I've read and what my experience is, there's issues that occur, and there comes a point where sometimes people make the decision. That is when they begin to plan, and they have. And hopefully they reach out. Here's the key thing that listeners should take away, particularly if you're considering something like this. If you are considering harming yourself, it's okay to seek help. It is okay to seek help. There's a national suicide hotline, which I'm going to go ahead and give, if that's all right.
Go for it.
It's 1-800-273-TALK, or that's, I hate the word sometimes. It's 273-8255. 1-800-273-8255.
Now, I like the letters.
I've always tried to figure out now which one is. But it is easier to remember, I suppose. So seeking help, there's nothing wrong with seeking help. In fact, it's a sign of self-preservation.
Amen.
One of the things I've noticed is when I've talked to people who've lost friends or relatives, like I was talking to an acquaintance more than a friend out of Texas via online Facebook. And he couldn't figure out why his cousin had committed suicide. And I was like, look, when I was in that mindset, you could have told me that the wall was green, and objectively it would have been green. But the way my brain was working, because I had all these other things that were going on, I couldn't necessarily acknowledge that the wall was green. So in Philippians 4, it talks about a lot of things. Whatever is true, whatever is good, on these things think. Okay. On one, there's two levels to that, in my opinion. One is the reality of whatever is good. Look for those things. Research clearly shows that even writing 3 things you're grateful for every day in a journal will give you a better outlook on life. See, what happens is when people get to this stage, they believe that there is nothing that can change, that there's no hope.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Well, in Philippians 4:8, it talks about these things to focus on. And like I said, the research proves that it helps helps improve our ability to see wider than the little tight focus we've gotten
Right,
onto
yeah.
where we're looking at the world, perhaps skewed.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second level is when you look at each of those things, and you are welcome to disagree with me, but the second level, if you look at each of those things really is pointing someone directly towards Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
what is true? What is good?
Exactly.
It says right here, Philippians 4:8, it says, "Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable,
Mm-hmm.
if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these such things." And so, yes, if this is an issue that you're dealing with, or our friend or coworker is dealing with, or a family member, yes, encourage them.
Mm-hmm.
Remind them of the way that God created them in His image, and that they have a purpose and a unique task that God wants them to carry out. Do those things, but also don't hesitate to reach out to a pastor or to someone for counseling,
Yeah.
because that's a sign of humility and recognizing. I mean, just think about the salvation experience. We've all experienced salvation. I mean, at some point there had to have been some humility there that said that we don't have the answer, and that Jesus and His sacrifice on the cross does. In the same way, we need to recognize, if this is an issue you have, what difference does it make if someone has an opinion about you or whatever? If this is the thought process that you have, then you need to make sure that you bring that before the Lord, and also to a pastor or a counselor, because this is not the design that God has for you. And we're going to get into the second segment about how Satan is involved in this process for sure, because he wants you to take your own life. He wants you to commit murder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a good reminder too, and we'll talk about this in the next segment, but it's a good reminder to take stock of whether you're going through it or someone else is going through it. Take stock of what influence you're being in someone else's life. Are you a conduit of those things that are good and true and noble and right and pure, or are you a conduit of things that are negative and harmful? And understand that you are leaving a mark on the people around you. Stay tuned for the next segment. We're going to continue this discussion, and we'll hope to see you there.